Merhaba arkadaşlar. Bu dönemin son dersini yapacağım sizlerle. Bir telafimiz de var. Onu da yarın YouTube'dan yükleyeceğim. Dolayısıyla bu hafta artık derslerimizi bitiriyoruz. Sizlere ödevler vermiştim biliyorsunuz final sınavınız için. Onları da zamanında gönderin bana. Çünkü lisans öğrencilerinin çok ama çok kağıtları olacak. Doğal olarak onları hemen okuyup bir değerlendirmeye tabi tutmamız gerekiyor. Hal böyle olunca da fazla bir sıkıntı duymayalım sizlere. Evet, bugünkü dersimiz Joyce the Modernist olarak geçiyor. Çok ünlü bir yazar. Bunu herhalde lisans dönemlerinde belki size anlatılmıştır veya söylenilmiştir. İrlanda edebiyatının en önde gelen işte Stream of Consciousness tekniğini ve modernizmi daha doğrusu çok iyi kullanan bir yazar. Biraz karmaşık bir yazar, anlaşılması çok zor olan bir yazar. Çünkü kendine has uydurduğu, çıkardığı kelimeler var. Ve bu kelimeler üzerinde de işte insanlar düşündüğü vakit kendisini alıkoymamış. Çünkü ne demek istediğimi kendileri düşünsünler. O kelimede ne anlatmak istediğimi kendileri düşünsün diye okura bırakmış. Evet. Virginia Woolf'la aynı zamanda doğuyor. Kaderleri bir. Gene aynı zamanda ölüyorlar 1941'de. James Joyce was the international modernist par excellence of his day. Çok ama çok böyle bilinen, tanınan ve ünlenen bir yazarı döneminin. Yet the question of where his modernism sprang from is difficult to answer. While the conditions of national life during his formative years in Ireland are often regarded as the pre-modern, the point is worth observing that the capital in which he was born had one of the most advanced communication systems in Europe when he left it in 1904. A fact which made its imprint on his novel, Ulysses, en ünlü romanı biliyorsunuz, in the shape of trams and telephones. At that time, Ireland was gripped by a mood of romantic nationalism. Bu da bizim için önemli. Romantic nationalism, which didn't readily embrace modernist ideas in politics and religion, other than those which confirmed the importance of the imagined community in Benedict Anderson's famous epitaph for the nation. And just as romanticism seemed preferable to realism for nationalists of the day, archaism rather than innovation was the dominant mode for literary revivalists, through that inevitably involved some degree of literary experiment. Joyce turned away from nationalists and revivalists alike, oradan artık dönmeye başlıyor dikkat ederseniz, and identified strenuously with a movement already proceeding out in Europe, which he identified as the modern spirit, before quitting Ireland in 1904 to become part of it. It was not, of course, until after he had left Ireland that he made any personal contact with Anglophone modernists, and then it was the modernists who contacted him in person of the leading exponent, the poet and critic Ezra Pound. Daha çok zamanını, yıllarını Paris'te geçiriyor bildiğiniz üzere. In December 1913, Pound wrote to Joyce in Trieste, seeking permission to include in his collection Des Images, Almanca, Fransızca pardon, a poem shown to him by W.B. Yeats. Thus began a literary association that resulted in the serial publications of, gene çok ünlü bir romanı biliyorsunuz, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and Ulysses. In the literary journals where Joyce's international reputation became established, in promoting the Irish writer, Pound insistently compared him to French standard bearers of modern literature, writing in one place that Joyce produces the nearest thing we have to Flauberian prose in English today, while in another expressing dismay at his national origins. It is surprising that Mr. Joyce is Irish, he said, before putting matters on a properly international basis. Joyce has fled to Trieste and into the modern world. He writes as a European, not as a provincial. After 1919, having passed the First World War in Switzerland, where he wrote much of Ulysses, Joyce moved to Paris at Pound's suggestion, there to remain until the Second World War drove back him to Zurich, where he died in 1941. For Valery Larbaud and others in the Paris of the 1920s, ki bu artık Fransa'nın çok ama çok böyle 1920'ler aşama kat ettiği dönemler, bir sürü akımların ortaya döküldüğü dönem dikkat ederseniz. Daha İngiltere henüz emekleme çağında yani. It was the interior monologue, stream of consciousness, which gave Joyce his salient position in the avant-garde. Avantgarde da biliyorsunuz herhalde yenilikçi anlamda. In 1923, T.S. Eliot confirmed his importance for Anglo-American modernists when he wrote that the mystic order of Ulysses had the importance of a scientific discovery, making the modern world possible for art. Work in Progress, later published as Finnegan's Wake, bu da çok önemli bir eser, in 1939, was however a discovery too far for Pound, who wrote to Joyce in 1926. Dikkat edin. Nothing short of divine vision or a new cure for the clap can possibly be worth all that circumambient peripherization. At about this time, Eugene Jolas, the editor of Transition, identified Joyce's latest experiment with the revolution of the world and took on the publication of Work in Progress from April 1927. For the wider readership throughout all this, Joyce's art was implicitly identified with the psychoanalytical movement associated with Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. This was an often hostile association, as when, for instance, a Sunday Express reviewer pronounced that Ulysses had been adopted by the Freudians as the supreme glory of their dirty and degraded cult. Bu da önemli bizim için dikkat ederseniz. Yet Joyce's attitude to psychoanalysis was essentially ambivalent, and there is little question of direct influence. For while he prided himself on the modernity of his ideas, he was often scornful of his imputed affinity with those whom he called the Swiss Tweedledum and the Viennese Tweedledee, asking why they were always talking about the unconscious and what they knew about the conscious mind. Sorgulamaya çalışıyor, bakın dikkat ederseniz. Bilinç varken diyor niye unconscious olarak konuşuyorlar. There is no doubt, however, that, like Freud, he placed the sexual instinct at the center of human life and that mental processes greatly interested him. It didn't always suit Joyce to be thought a modernist as the term was understood by contemporaries, and once this aspect of his work was widely recognized, he began to speak of his conservatism along with it. Talking to an Irish friend in Paris in the 1920s, for example, he insisted that he was a medieval writer, just as the Irish were a medieval people. Orta Çağ insanları olarak görüyor bakın. There is some truth in this. In his youth, Joyce has labored to convert a garner of slender sentences gleaned from Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas into an aesthetic philosophy. In later life, he identified the Book of Kells as a precursor of his own sense of literary design. A lengthy passage in Finnegan's Wake takes the form of a parody of Sir Edward Sullivan's introduction to the studio facsimile of the Book of Kells, a copy of which Joyce sent to his patron Harriet Shaw Weaver at Christmas 1922. Much of this was camouflage on the part of a writer who disliked the suggestion that his discoveries had been anticipated by contemporaries, and equally a check on too easy an identification with the Anglo-American, an essentially Protestant version of modernity identified with the liberal and implicitly imperialistic themes of civilization and progress. At the same time, it can be taken as alluding to a paradox that underlies his art at every point. Joyce was Irish and therefore implicitly pre-modern, yet he was also European in his own estimation, regarding Ireland as an afterthought of Europe. Bu da güzel bir ifade. And the Irish as the most belated race in Europe. Just as he aimed to make Ireland European, effecting a juncture between medievalism and modernity might be regarded as the chief intellectual task that he set himself in early manhood. Joyce was unique among his student peers in his openness to modern ideas, yet while most of those who stayed at home when he went into exile remained in the combined grip of Catholic and nationalist orthodoxies, they were hardly members of the shivering society that his castigates in Stephen Hero. Concurrent, a college friend, gave the lie to that unflattering estimate in an impressive memoir. The most telling difference between Joyce and his contemporaries at University College lay perhaps in his peculiar biographical circumstances. The sharp decline in his family's social status, brought about by his father's gregarious alcoholism, combined with an unshakable sense of his own worth, seemed to have set up a reaction in Joyce's mind that produced the air of intellectual superiority reflected in his autobiographical writings. Buralar çok önemli, dikkat edin. As a young man, he knew himself to be excluded from the courtship rights of his school and college fellows. Hep bir yerlere itilmiş böyle, takılmış anlamında. And was correspondingly dismissive about the clean dress of marriageable daughters in the households he frequented through their friendship. At the same time, he espoused the politics of sexual liberation, perhaps to justify a habit of frequenting brothels, which in itself marked his sense of remoteness from the prospects of a good match in middle-class Dublin. The decision to leave Ireland in 1904 with Nora Barnacle, a sexually aware young woman who was working as a chambermaid when they met, was therefore the outcome of a social alienation produced by the familial consequences of his father's economic downfall.